keeping you company this Ramadan.
Today, there are approximately 1 million refugees and asylum seekers from Myanmar in neighboring countries. The vast majority have made Bangladesh their home, where they live in some of the largest and most densely populated refugee camps in the world. The Rohingya began to flee the Buddhist majority country in 2017 when the military launched an operation aimed at clearing them from the country. And this Ramadan marks the fifth year that Rohingya refugees will spend in exile. And on the program today, we try to find out what is the plight of these people and will they ever return home? And to help us unpack the issue, I'm joined by Mabrur Ahmed. He's co-founder of Restless Beings, which is based in the United Kingdom, and he joins me now from London. Mabrur, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa Luqman. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Jazakallah khair for your time this afternoon. Ramadan Mubarak to you and your family and all the Muslims in that part of the Ummah.
And Ramadan Kareem to you as well. And thank you very much for inviting me on this afternoon.
Absolutely. Mabrur, a very, very difficult issue that we're discussing here. I went onto the website, did a little bit of research, and I saw there's a letter from a Rohingya woman, which is so heartbreaking. And she talks about the fact that, people around the world, they only want to talk about Rohingya for 5 minutes. And then when the next news cycle comes in, they forget about Rohingya. And yet it is one of the most heartbreaking humanitarian and most cruel situations that anybody has ever had to go through. Perhaps you just want to give us some background.
Yeah, I mean, I think this isn't something which is a recent phenomenon. Since the kind of mid-60s, 1960s, right, there has been a military junta, a regime, which has seen the Rohingya as, if you like, enemy of the state, something which is a group of people who do not belong. And of course, the history of the Rohingya people goes back to Burma for more than 8 centuries. So many generations, almost hundreds of generations have been there. And they are now being basically excluded from their homeland. And this exclusion took place initially on a legal perspective where their citizenship was denied, then went on to a kind of a xenophobia perspective where the Rohingya were stripped of certain rights. And finally, as we've seen, not just in 2017, but also in 1970 and also in the 1990s, a third wave of genocidal action, which means kind of complete obliteration of a community, the absolute expulsion, the absolute destruction of a community. And as a result, as you mentioned, in Bangladesh, we have a refugee camp, which is the largest refugee camp in the world. More than 1 million people reside there. And oftentimes when we hear about these types of issues, whether that's in Yemen, whether that's in Gaza, Palestine, whether it's in Ukraine, as we've heard recently, or whether it's in any of these kind of issues, sometimes we hear the numbers and sometimes we hear the statistics. But what we have failed to do, unfortunately, is we fail to connect a human story behind that. And I'll give you a very quick example, if I'm allowed to.
Please.
When I went to visit the camps in 2017, 18, and 19, I met a small family. There was 3 sisters with their grandmother. And oftentimes those 3 sisters would come to me and they would cry to me. They'd say they find it so difficult to sleep at night because they're so scared. So I asked them, what are you so scared of? And they said, well, in the middle of the night, there are huge rats which come inside all of our tents looking for the remaining bits of food. And we're talking about children who are 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. And very recently, just a month or so ago, I had a phone call with the same girl. The youngest of them said to me that the rats are now biting their fingertips. And I said, why are they biting your fingertips? And she said, well, we've got no food left. So that's why they've come now to bite our fingertips. Now, this is the sort of human story that sometimes we often forget, because what we hear is 1 million people have come to a refugee camp. 500,000 people are dying of malnutrition. 30,000 people have acute water crisis. And the numbers sometimes stack up, but the emotions don't. And so that's the reason why sometimes it's important to remind ourselves of the actual lived experience of people. Yes, as well as the numbers. Yes, as well as destruction. But actually the life that these people are living.
Mabrur, you talk about 1960s when this when the ill treatment of Rohingya people began in Burma, and going back to that letter that I referred to, is it just because of the religion of Islam that these people have been persecuted? Why have they been targeted, and why do they continue being targeted?
Well, I mean, the history of this is quite a long, detailed history, and there are many facets to the reasons as to why the Burmese government, the military, initially decided to go against the Rohingya. What I can tell you is a simplified version. A simplified version
Right.
of it is this simple:
Appreciate that.
that yes, there is absolute a fear of the religion. Yeah, there's an absolute fear of the spread of Islam, but it's more than that. It's a bit more layered than that. Also, the skin tone and the coloration is probably more similar to my skin tone, and they therefore don't look quite the same as the mainstream Burmese people or Myanmarese people. As a result of that, because of their skin complexion, because of their facial condition, and top of that, their religion, and then on top of that, they have their own language, and then they have their own set of cultures. These are the sorts of things that make the Burmese very hostile to the Rohingya. And their claim against the Rohingya is one thing, that the Rohingya don't claim Burma to be theirs. But if you go and speak to any Burmese person, one of their number one parts of their identity is the fact that they belong to the land of Burma. And so they're very proud to be Burmese. But that denial, the identity of Burmese is being denied by the Burmese regime and the junta.
And speaking of which, last month the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken declared that the situation in Myanmar as an official genocide. You know, and how has this been received by both sides, by the Rohingya people and the Myanmar people? And do you think that this is going to result in some sort of action internationally against Myanmar and its genocidal treatment of the Rohingya people?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Mona Lukman, because there's so many parts to this question as well. So number one is how do the Burmese and the Rohingya respond to the claims of genocide? Well, the Burmese, of course, deny that there's genocide going on. There's actually a criminal case going on in the International Court of Justice in The Hague as well, that the Gambia, a small African country, has taken Burma to the court, claiming genocide as well. And to be honest with you, Burma are struggling to put a very clear, very obvious case against it. So the Burmese continue to deny these American calls of genocide. So far as the Rohingya are concerned, look, the Rohingya want justice and accountability, right? They want the two things, justice and accountability. Justice is firstly to say, yes, this is a crime that they were committed of, but then also they need to be tried for that. They also need to be then, convicted of these crimes as well. And it's not just one person. We're talking about an entire army. We're talking about an entire government. And actually, for the most part, almost an entire society. That also looks like things like reparations as well, right? They've lost their homes. They've lost their livelihoods. They've lost members of their families. It's not enough just to say, okay, welcome back. That's not enough. There has to be more than that, right? So reparations is something that's also required. Now, the question about the U.S. determination of genocide, well, it's very interesting. If the U.S. regard it as genocide, why don't they also join the case with the Gambia at the International Court of Justice? Because that would absolutely, without question, mean that the Burmese are definitely implicit of it, and that the court would probably rule in favor of the Gambia side. Also, why don't they take this up with the UN Security Council? And the reason why those two things don't happen, the International Court of Justice and the UN Security Council, is sometimes you need sound bites to come out of a government. And unfortunately, it doesn't take 5 years to figure out that a genocide has taken place. It really doesn't. So 5 years later, we must ask the question, why did the Trump administration not recognize it as genocide? Why does the Biden administration now recognize it as genocide? And as a result of recognizing it as genocide, what will they do? Because they're also not part of the Rome Statute, which is a legal piece of work, which basically ties together the Genocide Convention and makes it a crime. So the US are not signatories of this. So unfortunately, what ends up happening is these types of statements from those who kind of know look like hot air, but they sound like such decisive, brilliant leadership. But they are really just hot air, unfortunately.
Yeah, but the one concrete thing that actually is happening, and you have referred to it, is the International Criminal Justice case that the Gambia has actually brought against that. I'm so fascinated to know more about. It's a small African country, as you said, and they are also signatories. Gambia has been signatories, since 1978, and I think Myanmar long before that, 1950s. But they brought Myanmar to the International Criminal Justice the ICJ and said, look, what you've done is a crime against humanity, and you ought to be able to, be held accountable. Tell
Well,
us a little bit more.
yeah. So it's really interesting, Mona Lukman, because they
Hmm.
didn't say that it's a crime against humanity. They said it's a genocide. Now, the
Right.
difference is there's two distinctions between genocide and crime against humanity. It's really important for us to get this correct.
Okay.
Genocide means that there is an intent to destroy in whole or in part. Okay, that's what genocide means. It means there is a niyyah to destroy, intention, as we say in Islam, right?
Right.
Whereas when it comes to crimes against humanity, it's like this, or war crimes, it's in the situation of a war or in the situation of a battle that some crimes have been committed. So what the Myanmar, what Burma are trying to actually say to the International Court of Justice is, listen, guys, we might have committed some war crimes. It might be a crime against humanity, but it's definitely not genocide, right?
Mm.
So the reason why it's so why it's so important, because the court is hearing the case of genocide. So if it's not genocide, then Burma are off. Then
Off
another
the
case
hook.
has to
Yeah.
come. Another case has
Mm.
to come, which is a case of crimes against humanity or case of war crimes. But in this one, it's just a case of genocide. So as long as they can disprove that they have not committed genocide, then they're off. They're out of the court. They are basically unaccountable. And that
Mm.
is the way, the legal argument that the Burmese are going through. And actually, it's a huge shame. And I'm so glad of the country Gambia. It's just like we've said, it's a small country, but a country of what
Mm.
spirit the country is of. And alhamdulillah, there, it's led by Muslims as well. It's a
Oh.
country which is saying, let's go forward and let's take on this country that's committed to genocide. And not only that, Gambia was one of the very first countries in the world to say we will accept the refugees, the Rohingya refugees, if they so wish to come here.
Mm.
And you know what? That spirit is very mighty, because there's not many other countries around the world that have suggested that.
Mabrur, we're talking about the hypocrisy of how different countries are, treating different refugees. We have the Ukrainian refugees that the whole world has opened up their doors for, and yet we have other problems like the Rohingya situation that's been going on for much longer.
Mhm.
Are you surprised at the way, the double standard has become so apparent for everybody in the world to see?
Absolutely not. This world is full of racism. It's absolutely, racism is designed by the white man, right? So it's designed to destroy. That's the whole point. It doesn't surprise me one iota. What does surprise me is that the general public, because I think most of this kind of privilege and this racism and this prejudice comes from elite level politicians and those who lead the business world. What surprises me is the vast majority of the general public in 2022 seem to also be blind to
Mm.
this difference. So, the last few days, I'm sure we all have seen images from Al Aqsa Masjid in Palestine,
Yes.
and we're seeing old men, young children, women being beaten just for walking by. Whereas when we saw those scenes happening in Ukraine by the Russian forces, aghast we were with such despair that humanity is being destroyed. It's absolutely fickle. It's not even believable to a large extent. But most importantly, it's really disheartening. But I think
Mm.
the tide is changing as well, Mona Lukman. I'm not so hopeless, because I think that the majority of people now are becoming more and more aware of this disparity. And the longer that this disparity continues, I am sure that we have hope in humanity. We definitely know that people of Muslim faith or non-faith or no faith whatsoever, of color or of from a white background or from a privileged background, can see the difference between truth and non-truths, right? So
Mm.
so that's the hope that we must have in Allah, in our generation, in our humanity.
Absolutely. Mabrur, this is the fifth year that Rohingya Muslims are going to be spending Ramadan in exile in all these refugee camps. And you talked about the conditions on the ground earlier, the fact that the children don't have food and the rats are even eating their fingertips. What can we do to assist, and how can we assist Muslims around
Well,
the
look,
world?
the thing is, you know what it is? Sometimes we feel so lost because we want to help, right? So, yes, absolutely, we should donate. If there's any causes, we should donate. I know there is a group, even in South Africa, I know Salam Foundation have been doing some work with the Rohingya. I know Brother Azhar, when he set it up, we spoke about this in detail. I know there's another organization called Colors of Hope, also a South African-based organization. There's Advocate Shabnam, who also does much great work, and I know is well connected with Salam Media as well. There's my own organization. So as much as we can donate, Restless Beings, for example, as much as we can donate to the cause, that's fantastic. But really what we need is the states to stand up, because we're going to give our, 500 rand, 200 pounds, whatever it might be. Yeah, it's a limited amount from our very limited risk that Allah has given us. But states have much more, and they actually have more responsibility as well. So that's the thing that we should do alongside, which is also we should donate our zakat, our fidya, our sadaqah, of course, without question, but also we should push our politicians, we should push our representative to say, why are we not doing more as a state, as a country, as a nation? We should do more. And that collective action will, inshallah, bring about some change. And of course, the other important thing is when we have small countries like the Gambia going to the International Court of Justice, again, we as individuals should ask our governments, whether that's in South Africa, whether that's in the United Kingdom, you guys should support these countries. You guys should support this cause, because a small country taking on such a big issue like genocide is unlikely to win as much as if you've got bigger countries with bigger economies, with bigger international support, with histories. South Africa, look at South Africa's history. Look at the United Kingdom's history. It's guilty of so many things. So our voices should mean more. So we need to push our people who represent us, who so-called represent us, to do that. So that's also as important as giving the money itself.
Mabrur Ahmed, on that note, we'd like to thank you for your time and for your passion, and may Allah Ta'ala reward you and keep you going stronger. And thank you so much for your time, and may Allah make it easy for you as well. And all the best for the rest of Ramadan, and as we look forward to Eid al-Fitr, inshallah.
Ameen, Ya Rab. And also, I'd just like to say a little dua for all of those in South Africa. I know there's some flooding going on across different places as well. May Allah provide sanctuary and sanctity for all of those people. May you all have a blessed Ramadan, and inshallah, we'll catch up soon.
Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mabrur Ahmed there from Restless Beings, giving us the latest news with regards the Rohingya situation, and a passionate plea that we, wherever we are in the world, we should put our governments under pressure and to say that they should act and make sure that they use all diplomatic means and on the international stage to ensure that the situation in Rohingya does get the attention it deserves, and of course justice should prevail. And the Gambian act should be always praised. But of course, another one here, the United States of America, saying that there was indeed a genocide, and if that is true, then we may be looking at reparations, we may be looking at the repatriation, we may be looking at the reinstatement of the Rohingya people in Myanmar. Very, very heartbreaking and heart-rendering story there. Bringing our time to 28 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. You are tuned to the Iftar Drive. Stay tuned.